Are you looking for a way to make co-parenting easier? Talking Parents can help you streamline your shared parenting responsibilities and minimize conflict by keeping all interactions organized and documented. With Talking Parents, you can stop worrying about the he said, she said, and focus on what really matters most, your children. Go to www.talkingparents.com/JBD to start a 30-day free trial today. Welcome back. Today we're talking about how to keep the marital home, a strategy your divorce attorney doesn't even know about. And with me today is Jeff Landers. And so it's one of the really complex aspects of negotiating the finances, and it's usually attached to a lot of emotion. The longer you've been married, the more that you've raised your family and have memories. The marital home could be something that you really, really want to hold on to or that you want to get rid of. And today we're going to talk about the complexities around that decision and some information you may not know that would be really valuable. Some of the steps that you want to take, research that you want to take, make sure that you're talking to the right professionals. And so I'm so excited to have Jeff Landers with me today. Jeff Landers is a nationally recognized expert in divorce-related real estate and mortgage financing and financing in general. And he has over 40 years experience, a track record of helping over 700 people. And he's written a bunch of books, including the one we're going to be talking about today. Jeff, jump in and say the title.
Divorce House Sense: How to Keep Your Marital Home So You Could Move On, Not Out.
Okay, so with no further ado, there is Jeff. Thank you so much for that. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Karen.
Jeff, before we get started, I love asking my guests to share something with the audience that helps them to know about you outside of your profession. And so the question is, what would you say you're most proud of in your life?
Most proud of, besides my two wonderful daughters.
Or maybe that's it,
Well,
whatever.
that's certainly a biggie, that's for sure. And one of the things that I put in my book that I'm also proud of is I got divorced after 34 years of marriage. And my ex and I are good friends. It's been 7 years since the divorce, and we get together not only for family occasions, but every now and then she invites me over to dinner, or we just hang out every now and then. So I'm proud that we were able to accomplish that.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. Our audience tends to be very high conflict, so they may be scratching their head and saying, I don't necessarily see that in my future. But if you can get there, it's always a good place to go. And congratulations for you.
Thank you. And of course, my background didn't hurt either, knowing all the financial aspects of divorce and all the triggers, if you will, to avoid to not have a high conflict divorce.
Right. 100%. So, what I love about this book is I've had dozens of financial experts on to talk about the what you need and what you have and the affidavit and all of that. And I love that we're coming to our audience today with a very nuanced, specific, and really important topic. And so I've never spoken just about the marital home. And so let's start with a broad stroke, right? So when one is considering, and people always consider it almost too early on, but maybe you'll disagree with me. When you're considering, do I sell? Do I buy out? Do we sell? Do I buy out? Do they buy me out? What are some of the initial things that you would say people should be thinking about when they're considering the marital home or
Well,
homes?
yeah, I think most people know whether they would like to keep the home or not, or they would think, if possible, I would like to do that, especially if they're minor children. Maybe it's the wife that wants to keep the home. I do think that the earlier you start pursuing this, if that's something that you're hoping might be an option, let's find out as early in the process as possible. One, If you can buy out your spouse's share of the home's equity, that's part one. And part two, if you are not solely on the mortgage, are you going to be able to refinance into a new mortgage in solely your own name? And the reason I say as early as possible is because you want to find why spend all the time and money going back and forth with the attorneys and trying to get the wording for the settlement agreement that you're going to keep the home when it just may not be a feasible thing to do.
Okay, so let's even talk about this concept of as early as possible.
Right.
As early as possible is still after some very vital, important steps, right?
No,
Like I have people call me, I want to get a divorce, and I'm thinking about the marital home. They haven't looked at their finances, they haven't
right.
gathered any information, they haven't filled out an affidavit. And so their thoughts have no numbers, no basis. So when you say as early as possible, what does somebody need information wise to gather before they start talking about can I or can't I?
Right. And even in that very, very early stage that you're talking about, people generally know I would like to keep the home if possible. So they don't know if it's possible, but they may want it. I've heard many, many people say, you know what? I don't want the home, too many bad memories,
100%.
not interested, or maybe they have a huge amount of debt, or maybe they need to downsize. They don't need 5 bedrooms and 3 baths or whatever. And they pretty much already made the decision to sell. So if that's the case, selling's a lot easier than trying to figure out how to keep the home.
We're talking specifically to the individuals today. So, for the listeners, if you are considering or your spouse is considering or would like to keep the marital home, that's the lane we're swimming in today.
That's right.
Okay, so now I know I'm entering divorce. I have an opinion. I have nothing to back it up just yet as
Right.
to whether or not I can. So that's my question to you. For the person who may want to keep the marital home, what do they need to do before? What do they need to do first?
There are a lot of out of the box ideas of how you might be able to, let's say, buy out your spouse. So you need to figure out what your assets are.
So if you're just entering it, maybe even haven't hired an attorney, or maybe you did, the first thing you need to do, I'm hearing, is you need to gather some financial information. You need to begin to
Right.
understand your financial picture.
So you want to make a list of all your marital or community assets, list everything, and then speculate of how that might be divided. Let's assume it's going to be 50-50. Okay, when you get your share, what you think might be your share, it's going to equate to X dollars. Then you need to also get a sense what's the equity in your home. Okay, now it was a very preliminary step. You could check Zillow or Redfin. They're notoriously wrong. I don't know if that's the route you want to go, as opposed to getting a professional appraiser to come up with a number. But just for the back of the envelope kind of analysis, get a sense of what the current value of the home is, and then subtract your mortgages, any liens on the property, and whatever's left over is the equity in the home. And then again, you're going to assume that you're going to divide that in half. So now you know ballpark what amount of money you may need to come up with to buy out your spouse. Now you go back to your list. Okay, what kind of assets do you have? Okay, can you afford to do that without basically wiping everything out? And that's when you really get into specifics of a case. Because if you're 60 years old, you don't necessarily want to give up your share of a retirement accounts, okay, to buy out the home because you're 60 years old. Whereas if you're 40 years old, that might be viable, especially if you have a job where you have a 401k and maybe you're getting matching and all of those, that you could figure that out. The other thing is you could sort of horse trade. Okay, so maybe you own a vacation home. Well, there's equity in that vacation home. So maybe you say, okay, look, I'll give you the equity In the vacation home, in return, I keep the equity in the marital home so you don't have to necessarily buy out your spouse. Or maybe there's a closely held business that has equity that you're going to get a share of. Maybe you offer that up as a payment towards the equity in the marital home.
So, if I understand you correctly, right now it sounds to me like you're speaking to the lesser moneyed spouse who might want to buy out. And what I hear you saying is once you have the equity of your homes, ballpark, and by the way, having been a real estate agent, a great place to go that's not expensive is to have an agent come in and give you that softer assessment. It might be
Right.
better than Zillow, not quite the professional appraiser, but great way
Agree.
to go as well. So here we are. I've ballparked all of our assets, debts, came out with my bottom line, looked at house or homes, what they might be. Now, I think we really want to talk about a lesser moneyed spouse and a non-moneyed spouse. There may be information you have if the moneyed spouse wants to buy it, because I read in your book there are certain things they need to take into consideration. We'll get to that toward the
Right.
tail end, because I think the bigger part, if correct me if I'm wrong, is that that lesser money or non-moneyed spouse may be told by their attorney right off the bat, you can't do it. And you don't necessarily agree with that, which is why we titled this the way we did.
Well, exactly, because most divorce attorneys are not real estate or mortgage experts,
Or
uh,
money experts. They're not numbers.
or money experts, exactly. And so they don't know. And many, I don't want to generalize, but many divorce attorneys will say, you know what, the easiest way, just sell the home, split the proceeds, go buy something smaller or whatever, because it is easier, let's face it.
100%. And I think that you're saying something really important that I want to highlight. So I have so many clients who come to me and they're like, I'm so frustrated that my attorney won't think out of the box. Like we've got this lane that we go in, and that's the lane you should go in, and just trust me, it's easier to go in this lane. And whether they're looking at distance parenting, or they're looking at how to buy the house or something else, what I'm hearing you say, and I want the listener to hear this, is you have a right to ask for, to find, and to advocate for creative, out of the box ways of doing this. If that's your goal, then you can find the people like you to help
Mhm.
do that.
Absolutely, because we started to talk about horse trading, the equity in a vacation home or the equity in a business. Well, there are other ways to do it as well. And again, it depends on specific circumstances. If you're relying on alimony and child support in order to come up with the money to be able to refinance the mortgage, okay, there are ways, depending how much you're going to need, maybe in return for having to pay your soon-to-be ex-spouse a little bit less, maybe you take less alimony if you don't need all of that for the refinance of the mortgage. Maybe you have a good job or a job that gets you a long way towards being able to refinance your house, and you could horse trade, or you could make different arrangements concerning alimony and child support.
Okay, so let's just pull back for a second.
Sure.
So we're entering the divorce. I can either suggest that the two of us keep the house. I've heard that, like until the kids are emancipated. And I know you have an opinion about that. We're going to get to that in a minute. So we can keep the house together, co-owning it, so to speak. And
Right.
what are the complexities of that? So let's just start with that. And then we can sell the house. What's the big deal if we just sell the house and get the proceeds and then the buying out? So I want to go through those first two to just get them
Sure.
out of the way and then dive a little deeper into the buying out if possible and the non-moneyed spouse. So often I'll hear, especially the stay-at-home parents, say the kids are whatever 3 years from my youngest graduating or X number of years, and I want to hold on to the house, and dad can move out. And then there's all of these complexities about, well, who's taking care of the repairs and what happens to, so could you, I don't
Exactly.
want to speak to my little knowledge, can you just
No,
elaborate on
no,
those
but you're
complexities?
absolutely right. In general, okay, co-owning post-divorce is usually a very, very bad idea. And one of the points of getting divorced is to disentangle yourself financially. Now, you still may be, if you're getting alimony, if there's child support, or you have younger children and there's parenting and visitation and all of that, you're still somewhat entangled. But if you're now going to keep the house, think of it, you're partners now. Okay. So, and I've seen it, it's been done. And again, it depends on the relationship. Are you guys still amicable? If it's a contentious situation, that's probably the worst decision you could make because you're going to have nothing but problems going forward. If you're amicable, maybe, but then you have to arrange. And I've seen settlement agreements that have an extra 10 to 20 pages in it to deal with, okay, we're going to keep the house. Okay, so how do you decide when to sell? Okay, what if the market is terrible, but one party wants to sell and the other one doesn't because now the value of the house has gone down? How do you pick a real estate broker? You've got to agree on that. What price do you agree to put it on? What happens if it doesn't sell at that price? How much do you lower it and how often? So you get into all these possible contentious scenarios. And then what happens if all of a sudden the roof has to be replaced and it's a 30 or 40 grand tab to replace that? So you get into so many different things. And then you always have the situation that a couple of years out, either one or both ex-spouses now have significant others. And one of the significant or both say, wait a second, we need the money for the sale of that house so we could buy our own place. So let's get that done. But the market is terrible, or the youngest child hasn't graduated from high school yet. So not only can it lead to contentious situations, but now you are really upping your legal bills by going back and forth in this negotiation and having your attorney add 10 to 20 pages to cover all these possible scenarios of what might possibly go wrong.
Okay, very well put. Holding on to the marital home and with my audience, right? Like with contention, just creates so many complexities, so much opportunity for ongoing conflict and stress. And the whole idea is let's get to the other side of this so that you can start
Absolutely.
anew. So there may be some of you who have reason, but, and I know you talk about this in the book too, right? I
Mhm.
believe you call it a terrible idea.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like
So
that kid's book, a horrible, terrible, lousy, no good idea.
So for the couple of bucks it costs for the book, please buy the book if that's what you're thinking, and at least read in more detail what Jeff has to say about that. So then moving on to the next one, you also talk in the book, which I was fascinated about. I hadn't thought of this, but understanding the complexities of selling a house when you're going through a divorce, and let's say a contentious divorce, because that's what most of my people are going through. So let's just inform them. What are some of the things that when we're happily married and we're selling and upgrading or downgrading is very different than we're in the midst of a divorce and we're selling? Why is that, Jeff?
Oh, for lots of reasons. First of all, one spouse might be trying to sabotage the other spouse. I've read stories and I've heard stories, and I've been involved in cases where one spouse will come, there's an open house, and they'll come and ruin the whole thing. One spouse will go and change the locks on the door. All sorts of crazy situation. And of course, if you have to sell the house and you're both on title or whatever, well, both spouses have to sign papers and one spouse refuses to do it. And then I recommend in the book that you actually, if you're going to do that and you're in a contentious situation, you need to get a real estate broker that is also experienced and hopefully has the credentials of dealing with divorce. And there's special real estate agents that they go through various courses and they learn how to deal with divorce and contentious situations where they're absolutely acting as a neutral because they have to. One spouse can't feel that you're favoring the other spouse or whatever. The communication has to be equal. You tell one spouse you've got to tell the other spouse, and all of those things. And sometimes people have to go to court, and these real estate brokers might even have to testify as to what's going on.
I 100% agree. And I think that especially if you're divorcing a really complex, high conflict personality, you don't want to hire a real estate agent who has no experience and is going to drink the Kool-Aid. And maybe you find yourself, I've had situations like this where it's like the other real estate and you're a high conflict person against you. So it's so important. And I do remember you highlighted a lot of these pieces in your book as well. And so if you're thinking about selling, even selling now, please pick up this book and understand all of the different things that could come up so that you can truly plan and be proactive in making this as streamlined and smooth as possible.
And a real estate broker that has worked on divorce cases and is proficient, they know how to deal with the divorce attorneys. They know they may be subpoenaed. They may have to appear in court and testify. And if you're just a run-of-the-mill real estate broker, you're not going to know what to do. You might even freak out. What do you mean I have to go to court? What do you
100%.
mean I have to testify? So you really need somebody that has done this, that understands, that knows how to speak with the divorce attorneys, that understands the lingo and the whole 9 yards.
And the other thing that I would just add on that is just because someone says they have the certification doesn't mean they've had more than one or two experiences. And
Right.
so when you find that certified divorce real estate person, dig deeper. How many homes have you sold? Tell me your most challenging story. Like really vet them well, because as you say in your book, the marital residence is often the largest single asset in an individual's portfolio. And so you want to really make sure that just as you're vetting your financial person, you're vetting your matrimonial attorney, make sure that you're not just saying okay to anyone, that that person is the right person for you.
Right. And, if the moneyed spouse is really trying to screw things up, they can. They could make life very, very difficult on all of this. So you really need somebody that understands those dynamics.
And I will say, for some of you, it's the non-moneyed spouse that's going to screw things up. And so a spouse could really just create a huge, Okay, so now we're going to go to the crux of it, which is this: it would be really nice to buy my spouse out. And I'm just going to share a little story here before you jump back into that. We had a beautiful English Tudor in-ground pool, fireplace, finished attic, finished basement, double dead-end street, raised my kids there. I would have loved to keep this house. And the house was a little bit upside down. We were a little bit upside down. It didn't make sense for either of us to keep the house. I went out, I found out what would it cost to change the back door so I could make the basement an income apartment, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, I thought, with all of the pain and struggle I've been through, why would I wrap an albatross around my neck as I was entering the next stage of my life? And so for those of you where money is tight, and I was not a non-moneyed spouse, I was an equal earner, but we were just a financial hot mess. And he stayed in the house and went into foreclosure and the whole bit. So that went that way. The last thing you want is to find yourself with those kinds of financial struggles after the difficulty of divorce, after the difficulty of a hard marriage. And so what Jeff is about to tell us about now, really tune in and see if there is possibility, and if there isn't, how to begin to pivot your heart and head around this. Divorce feels like an overwhelming perfect storm as you navigate pain, fear, and confusion while struggling with unfamiliar legal procedures and the pressure to make complex decisions that will impact the rest of your life. Our free Rapid Relief Call provides the clarity and confidence you're yearning for. Visit rapidreliefcall.com for support and guidance today. Of course, your friends and loved ones care deeply about you. But if you're honest, while they mean well, when it comes to your divorce, they just don't get it. And sometimes you leave those conversations feeling even more isolated. If you're feeling lonely and craving connection, support, and practical guidance, our high conflict divorce support group is open and accepting rolling enrollments. Facilitated by Karen McMahon, you join from the comfort of your home and feel heard, seen, encouraged, and powerfully guided in the emotional and practical steps ahead. Go to jbddivorcesupport.com/HCDSG and join us today. Are you looking for a way to make co-parenting easier? Talking Parents can help you streamline your shared parenting responsibilities and minimize conflict by keeping all interactions organized and documented. With Talking Parents, you can stop worrying about the he said, she said, and focus on what really matters most, your children. Go to www.talkingparents.com/JBD to start a 30-day free trial today. So the non-money spouse puts these two categories together. It looks like there might be enough money. And they're like, well, I'm getting a nice amount of child support and alimony. I should be fine. What are the complexities around that money that's coming in? Is it considered regular income? How does that play into them being able to get a mortgage?
Well, it depends. So a lot of people assume I'm getting alimony, I'm getting child support, I'm good. But from a lender's perspective, not necessarily. So in order for alimony and child support to be considered what they call qualified income, one, you have to have received it for at least 6 months prior to even applying for the refinancing. And when I say received it, consistently and on time. So if it's supposed to be there the first of every month, if it comes on the 15th each month, it's not on time. And if it's okay, I paid 1 month and I skipped a month, but then I paid you twice the amount the next month, well, that's not consistent. Okay, and then the clock would start all over again. So
Wow.
it has to be 6 months prior, and then it has to continue for at least 36 months thereafter. So now we're talking 42 months minimum, 6 months prior, 36 months thereafter.
And so I just want to highlight what you're saying. So if your alimony and child support isn't even supposed to last that long, it's a non-issue.
So keep it separate. Let's deal with alimony. You're getting alimony consistently for that period of time. Because if you have young children, depending on the state that you're in, the age of emancipation might be 18 or 21. If you have a 6-year-old, you might be getting child support for 12 years, but you might only be getting 5 years of alimony,
Right.
let's say. So deal with it as two separate revenue sources,
Yeah.
if you will. So yeah, if your alimony is not lasting at least 42 months, it's not qualified. And here's the important thing. So depending again on the state, let's say the age of emancipation is 18 in the state that you reside, and you're getting child support for your 16-year-old child. Well, they're going to be 18 in 2 years. That doesn't meet the 36-month requirement. It doesn't matter if you're getting 50 grand a month for that child, it will not count as qualified income. Now, here are some of the things you might be able to discuss with your attorney, and remember, divorce is state dependent. Each of the 50 states has their own rules and regulations. Discuss it with your attorney, but it may be possible, let's say you have a 16-year-old and you also have a 10-year-old, you might be able to allocate more child support to the younger child, okay, where you will not have trouble meeting those 36 months, but you will for the older child. So if you have a much smaller amount, you're not going to lose that much when they turn 18 in 2 years. So
Well,
again,
that's creative.
yeah. But again, speak with you. I'm not an attorney, can't give legal advice, but it is a strategy that I have seen work. So again, it's all state dependent. But yeah, talk to your divorce attorney about that.
Okay, so there are two sources of income, right? Alimony and child support, if you're getting both. So both of those, you've got this rule. Is there any value in getting a lump sum?
a bird in hand is worth more than two in the bush. If a spouse that's paying alimony moves to Timbuktu and stops paying you, good luck collecting. So there is an advantage to getting a lump sum payment because now you've got it. There are ways of how to turn an asset into income. Okay, there are numerous different ways. There's a type of mortgage called an asset depletion mortgage, where they will look at what your assets are. So if you have cash in the bank, they allocate 100%. If you have 100,000 as a stock portfolio, let's say for example, they'll only credit 70% of that because stocks go up and down. There are ways to create a trust in order to create income. You could purchase an annuity that use a lump sum payment, and a lot of life insurance companies will go as short as 5 years, so you don't have any problem having the 36 months thereafter, where you could take a lump sum and turn it depending how much you need. Okay, so you might be getting X amount of qualified income from alimony, maybe some from child support. Maybe you have a job where you're also getting some income, but maybe it's not enough, but you still have some assets. You have a stock portfolio, or you have a couple of $100,000 in the bank or whatever. You could use some of that to create additional income. Or you could use this asset depletion mortgage that will allow you to basically have additional income.
So, just this is a very general, not divorce specific question, but when a mortgage company is looking at my income, there's a percentage that they want to see that I'm not spending more than X percentage on my housing needs. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so this really comes into where they're looking at your DTI, okay, your debt to income ratio. Okay, so there are two components. They call it the front end and the back end. The front end is all mortgage related. They call it PIDIA. It's principal, interest, taxes, home insurance, and association fees, like a homeowners association fee. Okay, so how much is all of that monthly? Now, when you talk about principal and interest, you would be looking at what your new mortgage might be so that they could see if you could afford that. Ideally, they like that front end to be around 28%. The back end is all of the things I just described, plus the minimum payments on all your other debt, credit cards, personal loans, auto loans, student loans, things of that nature. And if you are the one that's paying child support is always considered an expense that's part of the DTI. That back end ideally is 36%, but a lot of mortgage lenders will go higher. But once that back end gets into the mid 40 or high 40 range, you're on thin ice.
So I'm confused, and so I'm going to assume that the listener might be because I'm doing quick math and this doesn't add up to 100%.
No, they're looking at the ratio of your obligation. That's the numerator. Okay, the
Right.
number on top. The denominator is what your monthly gross income is.
So
So
we're
you're
looking at
dividing
monthly
that.
gross income, and you said they're looking at you, if I maybe I misunderstood this, the 28% was they're looking at you spending no more than 28% of your gross
Gross
income
income
on your mortgage
on the mortgage and the related expenses that we spoke about, correct?
and the related expenses that we
The,
spoke
the related expenses meaning
of the
your real
house.
estate taxes,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Which means that it's very funny. When I sold real estate, people would spend up to 40% of their
Oh, yeah.
income, and certainly people who rent, right? So it's an interesting thing. They're hoping you have, what is that, 72% of your income left to pay everything else. I think most of us would be pretty darn happy to be in that
Well,
position.
but don't forget now of that 72%, now we're talking the back end. Now you've got your credit card expenses, you've got
Yes.
your auto loans, you've got your student loans,
Right.
and anything else, but they're still looking at 36%. But again, a lot of them, the reality of the market is a lot of people spend more 6%. And if they're pushing close to 50 on that number, they're on thin ice. They may not be approved. And that's another thing that where the creative negotiation comes in, because let's say you have debt, and in many cases, the divorce attorney will do something that's very fair. Okay, if it's debt that both of you incurred, like on a credit card for household, split the debt 50-50, and you cover half, you cover half. If you're the one that wants to keep the home and you split the debt 50-50, and now your 50% share is going to get you close to that 50% for your DTI, you're not going to get approved. So here again is where the negotiation comes in. Maybe you give up, instead of on some assets, instead of getting 50-50, you only take 40% and have your spouse pay off some of those credit cards. Okay, so that your DTI goes down into a range that will make it more likely that you'll get approved. And not only that, if your debt is reduced, your credit score is going to go up, which is another criteria for getting the refinancing. So in that sense, you could accomplish two things at the same time.
So what I'm hearing is if I have enough cash that I would get out of my 50-50 part above and beyond what I need, I can try to negotiate for my spouse to take more of the debt. I would take less of the assets, but it would leave me clear of debt, higher credit rating. And if that marital home is really my number one priority, I've got some creative flexibility here, should everyone be willing to play in that sandbox.
Exactly. And one of the big things that I found recently why people would like to keep their marital home is because prices have appreciated so much everywhere that it's like, okay, yeah, I could make good money selling the home, but what am I going to buy?
100%.
It's
Yep.
like anything out there is going to cost me that much more. And if I sell the home, I may never be able to afford something else. So that's another rationale why people want to keep the home.
100%. Another thing that you wrote about, and maybe we were just talking about it, but let me ask you, you referred to a term I never heard before. So what exactly is grossing up?
Okay. So when it's nothing disgusting, okay?
It's not like throwing up.
Yeah, exactly. So when mortgage lenders compute the DTI and look at your income, they're looking at gross income, okay, before you're paying income taxes or whatever. Child support has always been and is currently non-taxable to the recipient and non-tax deductible to the payer. Okay, starting in January 1, 2019, okay, for all divorces that were finalized thereafter, alimony is also no longer taxable income to the recipient or tax deductible to the payer. So, in essence, what you're receiving in child support and alimony is net income, not gross income. So, what mortgage lenders allow you to do is convert that net income into what it would have been if you had to pay taxes on it. That's what they're calling grossing up. So for conventional mortgages and VA mortgages, you could increase that by 25%. So let's say you're getting $1,000 a month in child support, which is tax-free. As far as the lender's concerned, it's equivalent to 1,250 because you can increase it, gross it up 25% to $1,250.
Wow.
Yeah,
So my immediate question is for the moneyed spouse, this 2019 law left them losing twice, right? So now they're handing out child support, they're handing out alimony as they should, but it used to be tax deductible.
right.
And so now for you, the moneyed spouse, you are paying tax on the cash you're handing to your ex for child support. You're paying tax on the money that and they're not, and the non-moneyed spouse, the recipient doesn't pay tax on anything.
That is correct. So what a lot of people have done, those that have to pay, they've taken that into account in the alimony saying, wait a second, I earn X amount of dollars. This is what I net after taxes. And now I have to give I can't give away 60% of my net income. So that becomes a negotiation as to what can you afford. The other thing is many states, child support is usually done by formula. Every state has a formula. And most of the states have now taken into consideration the fact that child support has always been non-taxable income, but a lot of the state laws take into account if you're also paying alimony, how's that going to impact child support? Because the alimony is no longer tax deductible to
Right.
the ones that are paying.
So I can't help myself. I just have to highlight again. One of the only things I tell my clients is you have to get a financial expert. And guys, this is why it is so complex. Even if you're good with numbers, I'm good with
Mhm.
numbers. I've been in sales my whole life. It can make your head spin. And here you are going through the hardest transition. Your emotions are all over the place. There's a lot of detail in these numbers. And then there's this kind of nuance. This is not the part of the divorce you want to be doing solo. And all of the nuance you're sharing is just highlighting that. So I just wanted to mention that.
And there's so many more. There's so many other timelines. We spoke, about getting alimony and child support 6 months prior, 36 months thereafter. I have been surprised how many attorneys, divorce attorneys, didn't know that. Okay, so I've seen settlement agreements that say, okay, for the spouse that wants to keep the home, you have 90 days to refinance the mortgage into your own name. Otherwise, the property has to be listed for sale. If you have to receive it for 6 months, after
You got
90
to buy it
days,
in 90
it ain't
days.
going to happen. So now another way to get around that, and especially in high conflict divorces, this could be a problem. One way to get around that is to start getting temporary alimony and temporary child support as early as possible, because that'll start the clock ticking for those 6 months that at least you could get the ball rolling.
Right.
But many divorce attorneys have said, wait a second, your spouse, things are rough between you and whatever. Your spouse is still paying the mortgage on the home, they're still paying the real estate taxes. Don't upset the apple cart by asking for temporary. And you know what? In certain circumstances, that's good advice. You're going to have to figure out how to do the 6 months, and you just negotiate instead of you've got 90 days. Maybe you have 7 or 8 months instead of just 3 months in order to do the refinancing or something like that. But
Under,
if it's possible and you could start with some sort of temporary support, that will get the clock ticking.
So let's pivot to this other piece. When I sold real estate, I wouldn't even work with a buyer unless they were pre-approved. Can you talk a little bit about pre-approval and how that plays out given the scenario we're talking about?
So when I work with a client, I do things backwards. So it's okay, what's the equity in the home? How much are you going to need to buy out the spouse? Then let's look at what you might, again, we have to make assumptions. If it's early in the divorce process, you haven't really discussed how to split things and retirements and stock options and whatever else may be part of that portfolio. But you start looking and making reasonable assumptions. Okay, what assets might you get? What's your current income, if any? Okay, what amount of child support might you get? Again, you could approximate that because of the state's formula. Then, how much alimony might you get? A lot depends on the income of the two spouses, the length of the marriage, all of those things. Again, you have to make reasonable assumptions in conjunction with the divorce attorney saying, okay, it's a stay-at-home mom, there's no income, the husband makes $300,000 a year, you've been married for 25 years. How long might the alimony last and how much might you get? And then you take those pieces and try to see, okay, yeah, there are enough assets to buy out the spouse's share. Okay, looks like we might have enough income, but let's see. Right now, mortgage rates have come down a little bit at 6.8% or whatever. We don't know what it's going to be in a year because you can't refinance the mortgage until your divorce is finalized because the lender doesn't know what you're getting, alimony, child support. If you go, or if you're paying alimony or child support, they don't know what assets you're getting. They don't know anything, the value of the house. So you've got to make assumptions. So you look at, okay, what's the scenario? Today, if you're getting a $300,000 mortgage for 6.8%, what's your monthly payments? Okay, can we do that? Okay, what happens if things go up to 7.5%? Can you still do it? What happens if it goes down to 6.5? Was that better? So you make certain assumptions. I might find after looking at each thing and putting my thinking hat on, and it's like there's no freaking way this is happening. Then don't waste your time negotiating. It's just not going to happen. Sell the house and move on. Better to know upfront so you don't waste all that time and legal fees going back and forth and all of that. If it is possible, then let's go in that direction and then let's negotiate what assets do you need to get in order to do the buyout? How much income are you going to need in order to be able to afford the refinancing at maybe different levels? And even let me go off on a brief tangent. Let's say you don't have enough assets, okay? But let's say the house is worth 500,000 and you have a $300,000 mortgage right now. So you subtract the two, there's $200,000 in equity, and you need 100 grand to buy out your spouse, but you don't have 100 grand. But maybe you have a job and maybe some alimony and whatever, and you could afford a $400,000 mortgage. If you could qualify for that $400,000 mortgage, now you've got 400,000, you pay off the old $300,000 mortgage, you have $100,000 left, and that's used to buy out the spouse. Bingo. Assuming you could afford the 400,000. The caveat is you don't want to be house rich and cash poor.
Can you say that again?
You don't want to be house rich and cash poor, okay? People need 6 months of an emergency fund. The car breaks down, the roof needs to be repaired or replaced. You can't use your last penny to keep the house. And again, depending on your age, you don't necessarily want to give up all of your retirement. If you're 35 years old, probably not a problem. If you're 62 or whatever, maybe not the best move.
Right, right. Wow. There's one more thing I want to touch on. And then, guys, you have to buy the book because we just can't touch on everything in the book. This is so fabulous, Jeff. I so appreciate your time. You say in the book about looking for a mortgage expert. Only a tiny percentage of them have training, experience, and expertise in working with divorcing and divorced people. And so much of everything you said hinges on being able to communicate with this mortgage expert and having that creative flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
How do you vet a mortgage? It's back to the real estate thing too. So they say they're certified or they say they can.
Well, that's the first step. There's something called a CDLP, which is a certified divorce lending professional, which I am as well. Just like for the financials, there's a CDFA, certified divorce financial analyst, which I'm also am. And yeah, you just have to talk to people because you're right. Somebody could have gotten their certification yesterday and they haven't done anything and they haven't thought about any of this. And then some people just don't have the creativity. Some of these things, whether it was my work as a CDFA or doing this, you have to be able to think out of the box. You have to look at different scenarios. And of course, it's always case dependent. Everybody's divorce is different, different parties, different income, different assets, different situation, different parts of the country. And you've got to be creative, and you can't learn creativity. You could learn rules and regulations in the law, but creativity is innate.
And I think that if this conversation is resonating with you, thinking creatively in terms of who's the attorney I'm hiring? Are they willing to be creative and out of the box? Or are they going to just keep, I have one client, he's like, I just keep being pushed into this lane with the rest of the world. And I want to explore other things. And so keep that in mind when you're vetting your attorney, your financial planner, your mortgage rep, and whoever else you're working with, your divorce coach.
And you know what? If I could add one more thing, Karen, and I state this numerous times in the book, your settlement agreement might be perfectly reasonable and perfectly fine from a legal point of view. That doesn't mean that through the lens of a mortgage lender, it's going to be fine. In fact, it might absolutely be fatal. Just what we talked about before. You've got 90 days to refinance, and if you don't, the house is being put up for sale. Perfectly legal, perfectly reasonable in the general terms of things. But if you're looking to refinance the mortgage and keep the home, that ain't going to work.
Right, right. So, one last question before I give you an opportunity to share about your book again and where people can find you and what have you. I just want you to speak for a moment to the moneyed spouse and the impact of the paying alimony and paying child support, and when the moneyed spouse wants to keep the house.
So sometimes it's easier because often, not always, often the moneyed spouse is the only one on the mortgage, which means if the moneyed spouse is the one on the mortgage and it's not both their names or the name of the other spouse, there's no reason to refinance. You don't have to do anything as far as refinancing. You already have your 3% mortgage. You're the only one, the only name on the mortgage. You're
Then you're
good.
just switching the deed over. You're just
That's exactly right. All you have to do is now come up with the money to buy out the non-moneyed spouse. You're already on the mortgage, nothing to do there. Come up with
However, if we're both on the mortgage,
Then it typically has to be refinanced. There are ways to get around it, and of course, for the last year or so, when interest rates have been 7% to refinance, and people are sitting with a 3% or 2 point something,
yeah, that's painful.
and a lot of people are, no, let's just stay jointly on the mortgage and we'll worry about it in 2 years from now. But again, if you're in an amicable situation, that's good. If you're contentious, that could create issues
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, that
So
could be like Russian roulette if you're in a contentious situation and they are on the mortgage. So, are there any tips? I guess what I just want to say is we're wrapping up. If there's any high level watch out for or suggestions for the moneyed spouse who's paying out child support, paying out alimony, and thinking, I make plenty of money. I'll just refinance. Like, where is their danger zone?
first of all, their danger zone is when they apply for refinancing, if they have to, if they don't disclose that they're paying alimony and child support, because that's mortgage fraud. And it comes with, it's a felony. It's very serious. It could land somebody in jail for up to 30 years. So uh,
Out.
if you're paying alimony and child support, you better disclose it. Contrary, if you're the one that's doing the refinancing and you're the recipient, you don't have to disclose it if you don't need to rely on that income. I mean, if you have a good job and you don't need that, you don't have to disclose it. And the lender, it's illegal for them to even ask you if you're getting child support or alimony. So that's number one. So you need to disclose that. Okay, so for the moneyed spouse, child support is always considered an expense that has to be included in computing the DTI. Alimony doesn't always, okay? And what you can do instead is the amount that you have to pay in alimony, you could use that what's called a reduction of income. So let's say your income is 10,000 and you're paying 3,000 in alimony. You'll eliminate that 3,000 from your expense, but instead of 10,000 in income, now you have 7,000. Okay. I give some examples
How does that benefit?
because usually your DTI is lower when you're not having it as an expense and you're reducing the income and it changes things. And I have some examples in the book where I do the calculation to show you how much better off you are. Again, it's case dependent, but it can be advantageous to do it that way.
Beautiful. Okay, folks, this man knows what he's talking about. Jeff, where can our listeners find you and could you just elaborate on, because I know you offer a variety of services. And
Yes.
Jeff and I have known each other for years. I highly recommend him. Where can we find you and what are the services that you offer?
So they can go right to the website, Divorce House Sense, sense.com, not like dollars and cents, divorcehousesense.com. You could buy the book. It's only $7.99. It's PDF. And then once you buy the book, you have the opportunity. I offer other things. I offer a calculator to figure out the amount of equity in the home. You could also buy the audio book if you prefer that. I actually have a course that you could purchase on exactly how to buy out your spouse. And I'll be adding a number of things to that as well. And of course, people can directly hire me to actually work with them one-on-one and walk them through the process and work with them and their divorce attorney to get this right. And I could actually help them do the refinancing down the road. I could offer the entire suite of services, but the first step, $7.99. What's that? A cup of Starbucks coffee? Get the book.
Buy the book, start there. The contact information for Jeff is in the show notes. So if you didn't write that down or you're driving, don't worry about it. Just go to the show notes when you get a chance. Jeff, this has just been brilliant and so detailed, so informative. I appreciate what you're doing in the
Thank
world,
you,
and I
Karen.
appreciate you coming and speaking to our
Oh,
listeners.
my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
And I hope you got a lot of value. Of course, I'll be back real soon with another episode. You have a great day. Thanks for joining us on the Journey Beyond Divorce podcast. I hope you found guidance and encouragement to help you along your journey. If you like my podcast, please take a minute to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. You can also visit us at jbddivorcesupport.com, where our team of coaches support both men and women through our one-on-one coaching, group programs, online courses, and free resources. Stay tuned for our next episode, and I'll talk to you soon.